Most founders don't kill their companies through bad decisions. They kill them through good ones. The same good ones that worked before. You're not failing because you're incompetent. You're failing because you're still being the version of yourself that used to win. Hi, I'm Walter, and this is The Hard Truth. Here's what nobody tells you when you're scaling. The skills, instincts, and identity that got you to where you are become the exact resistance that stops you from getting to where you need to go. And the cruelest part? You can't see it from inside it. The same conviction that made you fearless at $1 million is making you the bottleneck at $20 million. The same hands-on energy that made your culture feel personal at 12 people is making your leadership team feel micromanaged at 120. The thing that was your edge has become your cage. So ask yourself this, and be honest. Is the company waiting on you more than it's being led by you? Let me tell you about Marcus. He founded a logistics tech company at 29. Scrappy, brilliant, the kind of guy who could walk into any department on a Monday morning and immediately tell you what was broken. He had this radar, part intuition, part obsession, and it worked. The company grew from nothing to $30 million in 6 years on the back of his instincts alone. But somewhere around year 7, something shifted. The company had grown to 200 people. They'd brought in a proper leadership team, a COO, a VP of sales, a head of product. On paper, Marcus had delegated. In reality, he was still the last word on everything. Decisions would get made in the leadership team, then quietly unmade after Marcus weighed in at dinner with someone. The VP of sales would agree on a pricing strategy in a Tuesday meeting. By Thursday, Marcus had already texted 3 salespeople directly with different guidance. His team stopped bringing him their best ideas, not because they stopped having them, because they learned that Marcus's first response was always a version of, "Yeah, but here's what I'm thinking." And his thinking always won. So they stopped trying to beat it. They started managing around him instead. The company plateaued, not because the market dried up, not because the products broke, because the organization had quietly, collectively decided to stop growing into territory that Marcus didn't already understand. He lost his COO first, then his VP of product. By the time Marcus understood what had happened, he'd spent $400,000 on an executive search firm and 2 years rebuilding trust he didn't even know he'd destroyed. What happened to Marcus has a name. It's called founder identity lock, and it's one of the most expensive psychological patterns in business. Here's the mechanism. When you build something from nothing, your identity and the company's identity fuse. You stop being a person who runs a company and start being the company. Every decision becomes personal. Every challenge to how things are done is unconsciously processed as a challenge to who you are. So when your COO suggests a new org structure, you hear, "You're doing it wrong." When your VP of sales wants to change the pricing model, you hear, "Your instincts can't be trusted." And because your nervous system has been conditioned to protect the identity that produced success, you resist. Not because you're arrogant, because the brain doesn't distinguish between a threat to your idea and a threat to your survival. It responds to both the same way: defend, deflect, dominate. The deeper issue is control. Not control as a management style, control as an emotional need. Marcus didn't hover over every decision because he was a bad leader. He hovered because the company was the proof of his worth. Letting go meant trusting that he was still valuable without being essential. And that's terrifying. When your entire identity has been built around being the one who figures it out. This isn't a strategy problem, it's a self-concept problem. And no amount of executive coaching on delegation frameworks fixes a wound that deep. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Because founder identity lock doesn't happen randomly. It's almost entirely a product of how the culture of entrepreneurship conditions people to think about themselves. From the beginning, we celebrate the founder as the hero. The narrative of every iconic business story puts one person at the center. Elon, Jobs, Bezos. The messy human truth that organizations are complex adaptive systems shaped by hundreds of decisions and people gets flattened into a myth of singular genius. And founders absorb that myth. They have to in some ways. The early days of a company require irrational belief in yourself. You have to be the one who sees what others can't, acts when others won't, holds the vision when everyone else doubts it. That's not a flaw. That's survival. The problem is that nobody tells you there's an expiry date on that mode. There's also a second conditioning at work, the association between certainty and leadership. In startup culture, confidence is currency. Investors fund conviction. Teams follow decisiveness. You get rewarded over and over again for acting like you know. So your brain learns. Uncertainty is weakness. Letting others lead is abdication. Being in the room is the same as being indispensable. By the time your company needs you to lead differently, to hold space instead of fill it, to ask instead of tell, to build leaders instead of being the leader, you've spent a decade being rewarded for doing the opposite. And nobody warned you that the upgrade was coming. Most people who identify this problem reach for the same solution: delegation frameworks. They read a book, they take an executive course, they create a RACI matrix. They tell their team, "I'm working on letting go," and then spend the next board meeting jumping in on every third slide. That approach fails because it treats a psychological problem like a process problem. You can't delegate your way out of an identity crisis. Here's the more honest reframe. The goal is not to delegate tasks. The goal is to change what you believe your job is. Consider two founders facing the same moment. Their company needs to enter a new market, and neither of them knows it well. Founder A calls a team meeting, gives a 40-minute overview of what he's already concluded, and asks the team to validate the approach. They do. The market entry fails because 3 people in that room had critical information that contradicted his conclusion, and said nothing because the conclusion was already his. Founder B calls a team meeting, says, "I don't know this market and you do. Tell me what I'm missing." Spends the first 30 minutes listening, asks questions, doesn't land his own take until the final 10 minutes, and even then frames it as, "Here's what I'm thinking, push back on this." The strategy that comes out of the room is better than anything either of them could have produced alone. The market entry works. The difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't even humility, really. It was a fundamentally different belief about what leading looks like. Founder A believed his job was to have the best answer. Founder B believed his job was to produce the best outcome, and understood those are not the same thing. So how do you actually evolve? Here's the framework. 5 principles. These aren't soft leadership platitudes. These are the actual shifts that separate founders who scale themselves from founders who become the ceiling. 1. Distinguish your identity from your function. You are not your company. You are a person who leads a company. These need to become separate things in your mind, because the day your company needs a different kind of leader, you have to be able to make that shift without it feeling like self-annihilation. Practically, ask yourself every quarter, what would this company need from a leader right now, and is that what I'm giving it? 2. Make your replacement your legacy. Most founders unconsciously resist building leaders around them because great lieutenants feel threatening. Flip the model. Your actual legacy is not the company you built. It's the leaders you produced. Every person on your team who outgrows their role because you developed them is a monument to your leadership. Start acting like it. 3. Get information that bypasses your reputation. The more successful you become, the less honest information you receive. People tell you what they think you want to hear. You need structured mechanisms to break this. Skip-level conversations, anonymous pulse surveys, a trusted external board member who has no loyalty incentive. Not because you can't be trusted with hard truths, but because your organization has learned to protect you from them. 4. Separate the decision from the decider. For every major decision, ask, am I the right person to make this, or am I just the most powerful person in the room? Those are not the same thing. Build a discipline of explicitly assigning decision rights, not to be democratic, but to be accurate. The person closest to the information should usually own the call, with you setting the parameters, not filling the role. 5. Redefine what adding value means at your stage. At $1 million, you added value by doing. At $10 million, by deciding. At $50 million and beyond, you add value by creating conditions. Clarity, safety, resources, standards that let other people do and decide better than you could alone. If you're still adding value the way you did at $1 million, you haven't grown. You've just gotten busier. I want to stay here for a moment before we close, because I think it's important to name what this actually asks of you. Everything we just talked about requires you to voluntarily give up the thing that made you feel most alive. The control, the centrality, the feeling of being the one who knows. For a lot of founders, that's not just a professional shift. It's a grief process. Because the version of you that built this thing, that version was extraordinary. The 2 a.m. problem-solving sessions, the irrational belief when nobody else believed, the way you could hold the whole company in your head like a song you wrote. That version deserves respect. It deserves to be honored. But it cannot be the version that takes you forward. The companies that scale past their founders don't do it because the founders got out of the way. They do it because the founders were willing to be transformed, to go through the genuinely uncomfortable work of dismantling a self-concept that no longer fits and building a new one in real time while everyone is watching. That's not a management skill. It's a kind of courage most leadership books won't name. So here's the hard truth, the one I want you to carry out of this video. Your company has outgrown the version of you that built it. The question is whether you're willing to outgrow that version too, not whether you're capable. You already proved you're capable. You built the thing. The question is whether you're willing, whether you can hold the discomfort of not being the smartest one in the room long enough to build a room full of people who are smarter than you in ways you never could be. That's the job now, and it's harder than anything you did to get here. If this hit something real, share it with a founder who needs to hear it. And if you want more of this, subscribe. Every week, I'm going to keep telling you the things that are true but uncomfortable, because that's the only kind of content worth your time.